Hey, Mark, can you hear me? All right. I think I better get started here right into the debate. Today's debate, I want to justify that free street speech restrictions can be appropriate in some particular instances. The instance I'll identify is hate speech. I think there should be restrictions allowed on hate speech. Hate speech can be defined as epithets that are conventionally understood to be insulting references to characteristics such as race, gender, nationality, and sexual preference. And I think those restrictions, are valuable. First of all, it's not really, it's common to restrict speech, right? I mean, you have the old adage, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't threaten people. You can't commit libel. All rights that we have come with restrictions that are available. And hate speech restrictions can be very important because hate speech itself can actually promote hate. The same way that the same way that threats, right, encourage violence, hate speech encourages hate. Race itself is a socially constructed phenomena. And when you identify hate speech, when you create categories and you disparage particular people, right, those people become seen as inferior, which means that their speech, right, if you want to talk about speech, is no longer considered as valuable as other people's speech, threatening called the free speech marketplace of ideas. It's exactly hate speech that Hitler used, right, against the Jews to kind of, designify the Jews to lower their value, to commit genocide. And that's why in Europe, countries, in Britain and France and Germany, we see a lot of countries that are democracies that have restrictions and regulations that are designed to prevent hate speech. So I think those are the type of restrictions we can apply. In the U.S., we've seen a lot of hate and violence recently, particularly directed against minorities. And we have people, such as Richard Spencer.
So I'm really glad that we don't have to spend much time defining what freedom of speech is, and we got right into hate speech. Hate speech is what it comes down to, right? Like, it's an opinion that's really unpopular. So you pick your favorite form of hate speech, and that's the thing. And but there are sort of famous situations where freedom of speech has been used here in the United States. For instance, KKK marches, where the Ku Klux Klan walks through the center of some town, has some parade or whatever, and the police protect them. Now, they've got some pretty awful speech, there's no doubt about it, but I'm not sure the KKK has convinced a whole bunch of people with their rallies or whatever it might be. Certainly, demagogues from all over managed to use the most vilified of people in our societies at any given time. Right now, it seems to be people who are undocumented workers and people who, believe in Islam, that particular Abrahamic religion. But in the marketplace of ideas, the whole purpose of the marketplace of ideas is to find out which ideas are best. And if we don't allow some ideas, we'll never allow them. We'll never find out what is, valuable, what works, and those sorts of things. The infringement of freedom of speech is the infringement of ideas. And if we don't have the ideas, we don't move forward as a species. The presumption that we know everything right now is hubris at its highest. And we should not tell other generations how it is they're going to think. So freedom of speech needs to be protected for that very reason.
Yeah, I think our fundamental point of disagreement is what we should agree is valuable or not valuable speech. I don't think there's any social value to hate speech or hate rhetoric, and I don't think that we should leave that to future generations to decide. For our position to be, well, we're not sure if racism is wrong, we're not sure if gender violence is wrong. We'll leave that up to you to decide, because we know what happens in different historical epochs when we leave these things up to people to decide. I mean, a lot of times people make the right decisions, and a lot of times, what you refer to as the marketplace of ideas functions well. But other times it does not function well, right? You have situations with Nazi Germany, all right, where millions of Jews, were killed, literally killed. Now we have, we've seen the Southern Poverty Law Center says, since President Trump and others have been Richard Spencer particularly, right? You know, he's an avowed racist, right? However much you want to associate him with Donald Trump, or, you know, David Duke, the Ku Klux Klan, who supports Trump. But that's like a secondary question. There are people out there who are avowed racists whose ideas have hit the mainstream into the media, and these are being protected. And we've seen a rise of hate violence and racist violence. And I don't think that violence has any value. If you look in past historical epochs, it looks terrible. And I think the other thing, the marketplace of ideas assumes that everybody enters as an equal. When you have people who have been discriminated against and disparaged and is seen as lower classes in society, they don't enter the marketplace as equals. It's not like, oh, you have the majority class, right, where you have whites and wealthy whites who have dominated, and some of these people are popular in the areas espousing racist beliefs. When people or minorities come in, they're not starting equally in the marketplace of ideas. They're already starting behind. Their arguments are not credible because people are racist. People see them as inferior. And it's very difficult for them to fight and win in the marketplace of ideas.
So, you know, what essentially this is the picking of sides, and, you know, us deciding, you know, who is and who isn't the one that's going to be able to speak in which ways. And I don't, you know, by any stretch of the imagination, I am not the one to be picking these things. So if it comes down to the idea that, well, you know, we just can't have the Americans, the hoi polloi, the unwashed masses are just too dumb to be able to handle free speech. I'm not the one to stand there and say that. I think that it's far, far too much. Now, when it comes to, you know, vilified underclasses and these sorts of things, it's, you know, it's all a value system. Everybody thinks they're the underdog. So, you know, why in the world would I, you know, disallow them from speaking or not speaking? The best solution to bad speech, to my mind, is good speech. And that means that we need to be able to have these discussions. If you can't have these discussions, then people never even understand why things are good and why they're bad. You can't have virtue without sin, because it simply doesn't exist in the world anymore. And then once we have beat that out of society, it just goes away. We don't sacrifice children to volcanoes any longer, and thank goodness, but it needs to be weeded out of its own volition, because when we choose to make the decisions for future generations as to what's going to be good and what's not going to be good, you get things like Trump. The reason that Trump exists in the United States right now is because Americans were sick and tired of being called homophobes and bigots and everything else. It's the lashback. It's the pendulum swing. And if you attempt to shove that thing down other people's throats, they're going to react. Now, politics is a threat, and hate speech laws are just more of that. It says my time's out, but I can't hear what Steven's saying.
All right, it's letting me speak now. It wouldn't let me speak before. It was suppressing my speech, right? But you know, to your points, there's no, you know, I think it's both on. So I'm getting an echo. I don't know if you can hear the echo, but I'll do my best to get through this. It's just weird. I hear everything I say, so shoot back at me. But I make a few points in the one remaining minute that I have left. First of all, it's not saying it's not an attack on people as a society saying all white people are racist, a group of people are racist. That's why you had the backlash against Trump. It's an attack on a particular form of speech, and it's saying that if you are saying racist things, yes, you are racist, and you should not be allowed to say those racist things, because that empowers to create racist ideas. And as we see, even though we don't sacrifice children on the mountain anymore, if we allowed people to argue that and say we sacrifice children on the mountain, that becomes part of the mainstream, then those things start to happen. That's how things happen in Nazi Germany. People became valued. As long as people become to value, Mexican people become valued, and you don't have a chance in the marketplace of ideas to make the same arguments about how immigration is good for the economy, that it allows more workers, and that productivity is measured by the total number of people in society. There's no skills, there's no market efficiency, all these types of benefits, but they don't have that equal opportunity to make those arguments. That was a lot of echo. Hopefully it'll pass.
So sorry, I'm a little thrown off by the audio from the microphone there. So what I've seen, what I think we can look historically is, and this is this is a broad statement. I don't believe this is true for any one person, but as the generations have progressed, we have found that they are less and less racist over time. I can tell you, my grandmother said some things, but as time goes by, the generations have chosen to not believe that. They have taken the good speech that they have heard, and there's certainly racists in my generation and generations that, generation millennials and whatever they're going to call Generation Z. There's certainly some racists in them. But by and large, racism has diminished, and it's diminished because of good speech, not because of hate speech laws. There are no hate speech laws in America. There are in Canada, and what we can see is, well, it's not that big of a difference. Now, Canada's only had its hate speech laws for a shorter period of time, and what the hate speech laws are used for is they're used against everybody's a minority. They're used against the minorities that people say are vilified or whatever. And they're not generally used. You can make a white person joke if you want to make a white person joke in Canada. That's not going to be a problem. But if you go after the First Nation peoples, that's going to be a real problem for you. So this is the problem it's the judges, it's the arbiters. Hate speech is simply picking the winners and not, by any stretch of the imagination, protecting all minorities. So, I want none of it. History's shown that free speech already works, and that hate speech laws, well, they're unnecessary. They're just a way for people to get sued.
Well, there's a way for people to get sued, and we don't allow certain things to. Libel laws are an example of restriction on speech that occurs that we don't argue against. We have all types of restrictions on speech, and we still have healthy, functioning democratic societies. As far as your claim that racism has decreased over time, I mean, it's certainly questionable. People argue that, but more importantly, I would tend to agree with you that at certain times racism has decreased. I think in the United States right now, we see an increase in racist speech, as you even kind of agreed to when you said, hey, there's this pushback, there's this growth of this Trumpism in the United States, and we see this racial hostility being expressed in the speech. It's occurring now. In the past, we didn't have people like Richard Spencer that have become mainstream, who are giving speeches on college campuses and attempted to in the federal building, in the Reagan building in Washington D.C., and has a mainstream media following. We have places like Breitbart News. The racism is becoming mainstream in the United States, and it's because of this advocacy. And I think it would be foolhardy to just rely on counter speech in this historical epic that we're experiencing right now. When, as I pointed out kind of multiple times, that when minorities, because they've been so disparaged, because they've been identified as inferior, they're not equal in this marketplace of ideas. They don't have as many opportunities to challenge speech. Free speech was not the only reason that racism decreased in the United States. We had to suffer through periods of riots. We had legal protests in the 60s, right? And even some of those demonstrations, right, were kind of restricted. It took a lot more than it takes a lot more than free speech to stop racism when you have a rise of racism. That's what countries in Europe, they fear, again, the rise of a Nazi Germany, and they keep these laws on the books. And yes, it may be a question of one person versus another, but you don't need to protect the majority of white male and white female American class. They're already dominant in society. You need to protect the minority. Now, I hope we'll switch back.
Yeah, it looks like we've got it's switching on its own now.
Yeah, I think I'm out of time. So I think you have the last 5 minutes, but
Oh,
I think I'm done.
Looks like I've got 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, okay.
To address the issues. So, yeah, sure, there have been protests and these sorts of things throughout history. If there's any evidence that the Watts riot somehow, moved racial relations forward in a positive direction, I'd love to see it. What I think it mostly did was, it was people in, poor neighborhoods busting up stores in poor neighborhoods. What we have here now, we effectively do have hate speech laws in America, simply because you'll be shouted down in the name of, they don't use the term political correctness anymore. That's been washed out. But, you'll on college campuses and these sorts of things, essentially these places where young people are supposed to experience ideas, they use violence, they shout people down. What we have out in Washington right now is there's a university, and the name of it's not coming to mind, but or college perhaps, where they're having like a Black Day, and white people are not allowed on campus. This is like the opposite of what civil rights leaders were fighting for. This is segregation that's being self-implemented, and it's insane, frankly. And so this is a freedom of speech that we're going to allow because it's coming from a class that has been vilified, or whatever the terminology is. But the to be kicked off a college campus for your color is a real problem. The way things in Europe go, I can't really speak.
Are you done? Yeah. It says they don't have any time limit. Can you hear me? Maybe if maybe that, click it back. Can you, hey, I'm back. I think I have a minute left, but I see both of me in the window. But I guess I make a few points in conclusion. One, I agree with you that, professors shouldn't be kicking white people off campuses. I'm not arguing for that, but that's a substantive debate about an argument. My argument is that just hate speech in particular should be restricted because it disparages minorities and leaves them unequal in the marketplace of ideas. And, I think you made many good points in this debate, but I don't think you've ever addressed, that argument that I've made, that when you disparage somebody and they become seen as inferior, they don't have a chance. They don't have equal speech. So when you see a time of rising racism in the United States, would you agree with me, is causing the Trump effect? Those minorities are never going to be able to challenge. You're never going to have an equal seat at the table. And you're going to see an increase in racism. And restricting hate